Esta es la prueba de cómo la banda Los Golden tenía azotada a la población del departamento del Huila. No perdonaban a ninguna víctima. A los violentos atracos que cometían le sumaban el delito del microtráfico.
For over half a century, Colombia has been embroiled in a complex and devastating conflict involving guerrilla groups, drug cartels, paramilitary organizations, and the Colombian government. When we say Colombia, most people think of Pablo Escobar. They might think the troubles are over. After all, Escobar has been dead for 3 decades. But this couldn't be further away from the truth. The core of Colombia's senseless violence was not Pablo Escobar or the Medellin Cartel. The core is still very much alive and causing ever greater problems.
Una investigación de más de un año, días completos de seguimientos en zonas de extremo peligro y cientos de horas de grabación con cámaras ocultas son el resumen de este reportaje que muestra el ascenso y la caída de los Golden Black, una peligrosa banda delincuencial.
At the center of this never-ending conflict and bloodshed has been FARC, or the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. This is a Marxist guerrilla group that emerged in the 1960s. While a historic peace deal was signed in 2016, violence and instability continue to plague parts of Colombia, and now new cartels are forming under its umbrella, spreading panic and destruction on the innocent people of Colombia. A few days ago, a 10-year-old boy was killed by a cartel drone. It's Colombia's first drone death. It seems like it's gonna get a lot worse before it gets better.
Que se apoderó de Neiva en el Huila y según investigaciones quería aliarse con las FARC. Así empezaron los Golden Black, como un grupo de barrio que vendía sustancias estupefacientes y amenazaba a la comunidad.
Let's explore what is happening today and how it all ties into Colombia's bloody history. FARC's early history is rooted in the tumultuous period of Colombian history known as La Violencia. It was founded in 1964 as a Marxist-Leninist guerrilla movement. Its initial goals were to fight for land reform and represent the interests of poor rural farmers against wealthy landowners and what they saw as an oppressive government. The group began as a small band of rebels, but grew rapidly, finding support among peasants who felt neglected by the Colombian government. As FARC developed, it adopted guerrilla warfare tactics, expertly utilizing Colombia's rugged, mountainous terrain to its advantage. This strategy allowed the group to gradually expand its influence and control over rural areas, particularly in the southern and eastern regions of the country. FARC's growth in these areas was facilitated by the lack of strong government presence and the support they garnered from some local populations who saw the group as champions of their interests against an indifferent or hostile central government. As FARC grew in the 1970s and 1980s, it became increasingly involved in illegal activities to fund its operations. And yes, you guessed it, the most profitable path was the narcotics trade. This shift toward criminal enterprises would have major repercussions for Colombia in the coming decades. FARC was always a violent group, no matter how much they masked this behind the good intention to protect vulnerable people. First, they wanted power and control. Then, they wanted money. This snowballed into a sinister organization. In the 1980s, Colombia became the epicenter of the global cocaine trade.
They started to bring in cocaine from Peru, from Bolivia, and converting it into cocaine hydrochloride. And then from there, they had access to the Caribbean Ocean.
That's right. Pablo Escobar was not the only one to build a blood empire during that time. He was one of many who saw the growing business opportunity and one of the few who was brutal enough to pursue it at any cost. So was FARC.
And as a result of that, it became the economic law of supply and demand. And the Colombian criminals are probably some of the more astute in the world.
FARC initially became involved by taxing coca farmers and drug labs in areas under their control. Over time, the group took a more direct role in production and trafficking. This new source of income allowed FARC to greatly expand its military capabilities. The rise of powerful drug cartels, most famously the Medellin Cartel, led by Escobar, led to an explosion of violence in Colombia. Rival cartels fought for control of the drug trade while also battling against FARC, right-wing paramilitary groups, and government forces. This period saw frequent assassinations, bombings, kidnappings, and other acts of extreme violence. The drug trade had a profound impact on the Colombian conflict. It provided massive funding for FARC and other armed groups, dramatically increasing their military capabilities and influence. This influx of drug money also led to widespread corruption of government officials and institutions, undermining the state's ability to combat these groups effectively. In response to FARC's growing power, right-wing paramilitary groups formed, ostensibly to fight the guerrillas, but often engaging in their own drug trafficking and human rights abuses. An important side note, groups like FARC and right-wing paramilitaries often present themselves as champions of noble causes, whether it's fighting for the rights of the poor or protecting communities from violence. However, the reality is far more complex and often darker. While some members may genuinely believe in these ideals, the leadership of these organizations frequently becomes corrupted by the pursuit of money and power. The drug trade in particular has played a major role in this transformation, as these groups gain access to vast sums of money and military capabilities. Their original ideologies often take a back seat to maintaining and expanding their power. The result is a cycle of violence, exploitation, and destruction that devastates the very communities they claim to protect. Civilians are caught in the crossfire, economies are distorted by illegal activities, and democratic institutions are undermined. The noble facades become a thin veneer, hiding the brutal realities of extortion, murder, and oppression. In the end, the actions of these groups often directly contradict their stated aims, bringing immeasurable suffering to Colombia and its people. By the 1990s, FARC had grown into a formidable fighting force of over 15,000 guerrillas. They controlled large swathes of Colombian territory and posed a serious threat to the government's authority. There were several attempts at peace negotiations between FARC and the Colombian government over the years, but none succeeded in ending the conflict. The collapse of the Pastrana peace talks in 2002 led to a major military offensive against FARC. This coincided with the implementation of Plan Colombia, a controversial US-backed initiative that provided billions in mostly military aid to combat drug trafficking and leftist guerrillas. While Plan Colombia was criticized for human rights abuses and overemphasizing military solutions, it did significantly weaken FARC's capabilities. By the late 2000s, FARC had been pushed out of many areas and its forces reduced by half. In 2012, Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos initiated a new round of peace negotiations with FARC, marking a significant attempt to end the decades-long conflict. After 4 years of intense discussions, a comprehensive peace agreement was finally signed in 2016. This landmark accord included several key provisions aimed at addressing the root causes of the conflict and facilitating FARC's transition from an armed group to a legitimate political entity. The agreement called for FARC to disarm and transform into a political party, allowing former rebels to participate in the democratic process. It also outlined plans for land reform and rural development programs to address long-standing inequalities. A transitional justice system was established to deal with war crimes, balancing the need for accountability with the goal of reconciliation. Additionally, the accord included crop substitution programs to help farmers transition away from coca cultivation, targeting the economic foundations of the drug trade that had fueled the conflict for so long. The 2016 peace agreement, while historic, proved to be highly divisive within Colombia. Initially, the accord was narrowly rejected in a public referendum, reflecting deep-seated concerns and mistrust among many Colombians. A revised version was subsequently approved by Congress, officially ending the 52-year conflict with FARC. However, the implementation of the peace deal has been fraught with challenges. Some FARC members, disillusioned with the peace process, have rearmed or joined dissident factions, undermining the agreement's effectiveness. The power vacuum left by FARC's demobilization has been exploited by other armed groups who have moved into formerly FARC-controlled territories. The government has struggled to establish a meaningful state presence in remote areas, leaving many communities vulnerable. Right-wing politicians have consistently opposed key aspects of the peace deal, creating political hurdles to its full implementation. Additionally, the reintegration of former combatants into civilian life has proven to be a complex and often difficult process, highlighting the long-term challenges of transitioning from conflict to peace. Despite these issues, the peace accord has reduced overall levels of violence and allowed Colombia to begin addressing the root causes of the conflict. However, recent years have seen concerning signs of backsliding.
Muchas veces al grupo urbano de las FARC que operaba en esa ciudad, con ese respaldo, obtenían aún más poder.
Se podría hacer un consolidado, un global de aproximadamente 2.000 millones de pesos.
The peace agreement transformed FARC from an armed insurgency into a legal political party, now called communes. As part of the deal, the party was guaranteed 10 seats in Colombia's Congress until 2026. However, FARC's transition into the political arena has been far from smooth. The party has faced considerable challenges in gaining broader public support, consistently underperforming in elections outside of their guaranteed seats. This struggle for legitimacy has been compounded by the assassination of several prominent party leaders, raising concerns about the safety of former combatants. Perhaps most concerning has been the rearmament of some FARC members. In 2019, several high-ranking ex-commanders announced they were taking up arms again, accusing the government of betraying the peace deal. These FARC dissidents have joined with other armed groups in some areas, contributing to a resurgence of violence. The use of the FARC name and symbols by these dissident groups has caused confusion. The political party has tried to distance itself from the armed factions. However, the lines between political and criminal activities remain blurry in parts of Colombia. One alarming development in recent years has been the adoption of drone technology by armed groups in Colombia. FARC dissidents and other criminal organizations have begun using drones for surveillance, attacks, and drug trafficking. This has presented huge new challenges for Colombian security forces. Drones are used for anything from smuggling narcotics across borders to gathering intel on rival gangs, monitoring authorities, and even dropping small explosives on targets. In other words, not only is the violence not coming to an end, but it's increasing thanks to new technologies. Encrypted communication apps and using cryptocurrency for money laundering make FARC and their affiliated criminal groups even harder to track down and arrest. And today, they're using social media to brainwash and recruit young teens from vulnerable backgrounds. While FARC officially renounced involvement in the drug trade as part of the peace deal, white powder production in Colombia has actually increased since 2016. FARC's withdrawal from coca-growing regions created a power vacuum that was quickly filled by other armed groups and criminal gangs, eager to control the lucrative trade. At the same time, the suspension of aerial fumigation of coca crops due to health concerns removed a significant eradication method. Also, crop substitution programs designed to provide farmers with viable alternatives to coca cultivation have struggled to gain traction and deliver sustainable results. So despite the peace deal's intentions, the drug trade continues to flourish. Colombia remains the world's top white powder producer, with an estimated 212,000 hectares under coca cultivation in 2019. Profits from the drug trade continue to fuel violence and corruption throughout the country. Today, there are four main forces in the Colombian drug trade: FARC dissidents, the Gulf Cartel, the National Liberation Army, and Mexican cartels like Sinaloa or the CJNG, fighting for their own territories in Colombia. And it's easy to see that this conflict will never end as long as there are huge profits to be made from coke. Corruption has played a major role in perpetuating Colombia's cycle of violence and instability. The vast amounts of money generated by the drug trade have corroded institutions at all levels of government. Anyone from a street cop to a judge or a high-ranking politician can be bought. Whether with gold or intimidation, gangs get their way. Authorities and politicians protect them while they do their dirty business. And if someone threatens them with prison time, they take their life and send a message to the rest. This systemic corruption undermines efforts to combat armed groups and establish the rule of law. It also erodes public trust in the government, making it harder to implement reforms and peace initiatives. Enter Golden Black, Colombia's latest threat.
Esta es la prueba de cómo la banda Los Golden tenía azotada a la población del departamento del Huila. No perdonaban a ninguna víctima. A los violentos atracos que cometían le sumaban el delito del microtráfico.
Que se apoderó de Neiva en el Huila y, según investigaciones, quería aliarse con las FARC. Así empezaron los Golden Black, como un grupo de barrio que vendía sustancias estupefacientes y amenazaba a la comunidad.
Indeed, the Golden Blacks started with support from FARC, but in the world of cartels, it's a bit like during medieval warfare. One army would strike a deal with another, then fight it after striking a deal with a more lucrative one. The Golden Blacks and FARC are not best friends, nor are the multiple powers that are fighting over control of Colombia. The innocent people of Colombia are 24/7 terrorized by violence, extortion, and threats from these gangs.
Encontrarlos ahí vendiendo, incluso está consumiendo pues delante de los niños, delante de todo el que estuviera ahí y sentir que lo amenazaban a uno.
Authorities have identified the key members of the Golden Black, from the most trusted soldiers to the kingpin, known as Yodas.
Su nombre real es Carlos Javier González Campo. Creció en esos mismos barrios donde luego tomó el poder delincuencial. Así lo describen las autoridades.
When the Colombian authorities stumbled upon Yodas and his gang, they assumed they were just a band of hoodlums selling narcotics in their neighborhood. But the more they investigated, the more they discovered they posed a real threat to the entire country. They have more money, more technology, and more power than the authorities imagined.
Se nos hacía algo extraño el hecho de que 3 organizaciones criminales dedicadas a azotar y a tener en zozobra a la comunidad del municipio de Neiva pudieran estar vinculadas de alguna manera.
Las principales pandillas de Neiva se aliaron para cometer todo tipo de delitos a nombre de un solo grupo. Unos comercializaban sustancias, otros se encargaban de los robos de vehículos y otros hurtaban en las calles.
Whether as part of a network or by fighting each other, gangs and cartels bring immeasurable destruction to Colombia, and authorities can only arrest a few people each day, while the gangs keep growing. The decades-long conflict in Colombia has exacted an enormous toll on society, with impacts that reach far beyond the immediate violence. Over 260,000 people have lost their lives, while millions more have been internally displaced. The activities of armed groups like FARC and ELN have contributed to a horrific wave of femicides in Colombia, particularly in conflict-ridden areas such as Tabú. These groups, in their struggle for territorial control and in their efforts to maintain power, have created an environment where violence against women has become a tool of war and intimidation. Women suspected or even wrongfully accused of being informants or collaborating with rival factions are often targeted for brutal punishment. This targeting is not just about eliminating perceived threats, it's also a way to assert dominance over communities and instill fear. The case of Tabú illustrates how the complex interplay between armed groups, government forces, and local populations can lead to devastating consequences for women. Today, many people who live in Colombia live in warlike conditions. Every day, they fear for their lives. Many other human rights abuses have occurred, leaving deep scars on communities and individuals. The conflict has stunted economic development, eroded democratic institutions, and inflicted psychological trauma that spans generations. Rural communities and ethnic minorities have borne the brunt of this violence, suffering disproportionately from displacement and targeted attacks. Even in areas not directly affected by fighting, the conflict has profoundly shaped daily life. Freedom of movement has been restricted due to security concerns, while economic opportunities, especially in rural areas, have been severely limited. Trust in government institutions has eroded, and violence has become normalized as a way to resolve disputes. The country has also experienced a significant brain drain as educated Colombians seek opportunities abroad. Addressing this legacy of trauma and building a culture of peace remains one of Colombia's greatest challenges. While overall levels of violence have decreased since the 2016 peace accord, recent years have seen some concerning trends. There has been an increase in killings of social leaders and human rights defenders, as well as a rise in massacres and forced displacements in some regions. Criminal gangs have grown more powerful in urban areas, while implementation of peace accord provisions has been slow. This includes Colombia's capital city, Bogotá.
Con tan solo 30 cuadras, este barrio reúne los problemas sociales, los negocios ilegales y las guaridas de la delincuencia.
Political polarization over how to address the conflict continues to hinder progress. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated many of these issues, straining government resources and worsening economic conditions that fuel recruitment into armed groups. Key ongoing challenges include establishing a state presence in former conflict zones, providing economic alternatives to the drug trade, protecting vulnerable populations from violence, reforming corrupt institutions, addressing political divisions over the peace process, and combating new technologies used by armed groups. The administration of President Iván Duque, which took office in 2018, has faced criticism for not fully committing to implementation of the peace accord. However, Duque has argued that adjustments are needed to address flaws in the agreement. As Colombia continues to navigate its path toward lasting peace, overcoming these challenges will be crucial to ensuring a stable and prosperous future for all its citizens. Colombia stands at a crossroads. The 2016 2016 peace agreement created a historic opportunity to end decades of conflict, but that opportunity could slip away if current negative trends continue. The next few years will be critical in determining whether Colombia can consolidate peace or risks sliding back into widespread violence. Understanding this complex history is crucial for contextualizing Colombia's current situation. By learning about both the tragedies and the heroic efforts toward peace, we can better appreciate the challenges facing Colombia and support its people in their quest for a brighter future. Hey, thanks for watching. What are your thoughts on the current situation in Colombia? Do you think it will ever be a peaceful place for all its inhabitants? Leave a kind comment, and don't forget to like and subscribe before you leave. See you next time.